Hi, I'm Anthea Butler, Associate Professor of Religion and Graduate Chair of Religion at the University of Pennsylvania. And I am speaking with...
I'm Jeff Sharlet, Assistant Professor of English at Dartmouth College and contributing editor for Harper's Magazine and author. My newest book is called Sweet Heaven When I Die, Faith, Faithlessness, and the Country in Between. And blogging heads gave me the opportunity to think about who I wanted to respond to the book, and so it's a little bit of a rigged game here. So I asked Professor Anthea Butler, because I adore her work on religion dispatches and her scholarly work, and someone who was thinking about a lot of the same things. I'm coming at this as a creative writer and a journalist, and she's coming at this as a scholar. But we often find ourselves having some interesting conversations. So I asked Anthea to take a look at the book and to give me her thoughts.
Yeah, and it's a great book. Although I must say, in the interest of, telling the general public out there, if this is a conversation between myself and Jeff Sharlet, it might go over the blogging head's limit of time, because usually we have something really nice and brown in a glass when we're talking. And so since this blogging head's being taped, let's say in the evening as opposed to the morning when everybody's holding a brown cup of coffee, we have something brown, but it's right on the side of our computers, right, Jeff?
Indeed, we should have a Blogging Heads toast. We're inaugurating a new Blogging Heads tradition. It's late night with Blogging Heads, and neither of us smoke, so we can't really sort of get that vibe going. But you can hear the ice cubes clinking, at least in my glass. I don't know. Are you drinking?
Well, I'm kind of a purist. Mine is just straight neat. Right. It's that kind of night. It's wet outside. But I want to start off by talking about this wonderful review you got in the Washington Post. So if you bear with me, I just want to read just a little piece of it. Okay. The reviewer says this is a prevailing division of the world that Sweet Heaven presents between those who use faith as a tool for answering life's difficult riddles and those whose faith is less an instrument than a blindfold. Sharlet contends that this latter faith exists without belief because it operates without understanding. I'd love it if you could comment on that. I thought it was a great review, and you got a great review in the Boston Globe too. So yes, I am giving you your props for that. So I'm interested to hear you expand on that a little bit before we start talking about the book.
Well, yeah, I use a subtitle in the book, Faith, Faithlessness, and the Country in Between, and really most of the book is about that vast in between. I think I think actually in that review, and maybe there's two polar opposites in the book, and one is a story about a fundamentalist youth movement called Battle Cry. And I use the term fundamentalist advisedly. That's a fair term to describe this movement, called Battle Cry. And all these teens are getting together in these big rallies, and they would describe people like you and me, and people much more conservative than you and me, as fifth columnists, as cultural terrorists, and they see themselves as, quote, frontline soldiers fighting this thing. So that's probably the blind faith side. And then the other side is I think maybe some of the personal stories in the book of sort of wondering. And, I sort of think of all the people I write about in the book, maybe myself included, as sort of walking this tightrope between despair and desire.
Exactly.
And the desire can tip over into blind faith, but it can also lead you to these real acts of imagination.
Yeah, exactly. And I was sort of thinking we should start off by somebody who's been in the news a lot lately for some different reasons. I was just fascinated with the essay about Cornel West, and I'm really interested to hear, first of all, how were those bar times in Princeton? That was really kind of interesting. I thought if you could have a philosophical/religious conversation, that's a great place to have it.
Yeah. Well, the essay is called "Begin with the Dead," which is a Cornel West phrase, and I should say it began, I write a lot for Rolling Stone magazine, and it began with my editor at Rolling Stone saying, you want to write about Cornel West? And I sort of knew about him kind of what everybody knows, and not much more than that. And I said, well, let me, spend some time reading some books and see if this is really someone that I'm interested in finding out more about. So I read Prophesy Deliverance, his first book published in 1982. And I remember reading the introduction. It's an amazing book in which he seeks to reconcile the two great strands of his life, which is Christianity. People forget this is a very devout Christian man. And radicalism. I mean, Marxism. I mean, he's also a very hard left man. He says, look, the left and Christianity neither stands on their own. In his view, they lean on each other. And it's a beautiful book. I happen not to be a Christian, but nonetheless, I mean, I found my eyes tearing up as I was reading this dense, hard work of theology and philosophy. And I moved on to his work on pragmatism. And you think pragmatism is going to be kind of a boring tradition to read about, but you read it, and he likes to describe himself as a bluesman, as a jazz man of ideas, and so on. And when you're reading about pragmatism, suddenly pragmatism starts to sound like jazz, the philosophic tradition. I mean, that's how he sees it, and so I got really engaged in it, and I end up over about the course of a year, which was not Rolling Stone's idea. I kind of went overboard with it, and I would go down every few months between reading, and we would just sit down there for a while, and we would occasionally have a glass like this and just talk. And I sort of heard a lot of the stories that, of course, any public person like Cornel West is going to tell a lot. But it's interesting. The thing that I think sort of got us into a different space is actually a different essay in the book. It's called Born, Again. Born, Again. It's about the 1920s banjo player Doc Boggs, and I've written a piece about Doc Boggs and despair and everything like this, and what it means and so on. And because Cornel reads everything, he doesn't sleep. He reads everything. I published it in a very small, I couldn't believe that. I was like, Southern magazine. And he says, Brother Jeff, I saw your piece, and we got to talk about Doc Boggs. And he already knew about Doc Boggs, and suddenly that put us on this different footing, and that allowed me, I hope. And I'd be interested to hear what you say, because Cornel is in the news, and because people are upset with Cornel right now.
Yes, they are.
But I feel like they're not really looking at the totality of the contribution that this person has made, and that's sort of the story I'm trying to tell in that essay, and also the tragedy. I think he's a very tragic figure. I don't think he would deny it. But I think that's not understood about him either.
Yeah, no, I think, the part that I was really, intrigued about it, and I think I told you this back when the Rolling Stone article came out, was the whole thing about Blanche Dubois. From Streetcar Named Desire. And I just thought, this is very interesting that this, this great philosopher, this person who has a reader about them, you think these, he's got these very lofty thoughts, and it's Blanche.
That's one of the characters he sees himself as. Yeah.
Right. And so I just thought, I'm like, okay, so if Cornel West is really Blanche Dubois, then this explains a lot, but it still leaves a lot of mystery on the side, because I thought there were two stories you were really telling. One story is sort of the story about, somebody who's studied pragmatism, these great books, great philosopher. He's so great that he could be in the Matrix, and he's vibing all this stuff. He's doing the jazz. And then we got the guy who has the 3 marriages and the kid and these romances that don't really quite work because he doesn't have really relationships, and he loves everybody, and everybody is reachable to him, and he hugs them. But in the last few months, with everything that's happened vis-a-vis the sort of little tiff that happened about the things
we should explain that for
president.
Viewers
yes, I will explain this for the viewers. Cornel West has been involved in this sort of how can I say this nicely, an imbroglio about the president, and basically because he's been with Tavis Smiley, who also has a television show. They're doing a poverty bus tour right now. A lot of African Americans and others got upset because he has been very critical of the president and has felt slighted by him. And in a piece that was written, basically was upset because a bellman had gotten tickets to the inauguration and he did not get tickets. Now, I think, this is one of the ways in which, this is where Professor West can be a little bit like in Blanche, right? This is the, I'm very upset, I'm emotive, blah, blah, blah. Now, if he saw the president tomorrow, I think he might be the pastor's kid, and he'd still give him a hug. And this is,
I don't know if it was, because remember that was, I think it was at the NAACP convention. Obama came over and started dressing him down, and I think it goes very much to the ideas that Cornel West is trying to talk about as a citizen. You're a citizen. this is a democracy. We don't have to have that reverence. So he says Obama's dressing him down. He's polite. He says, no, thank you. I'm not taking that from you.
Yeah,
I don't have to take that from you. And I think, and he will say, look, I think a lot of that lesson. I mean, the idea that I think animates so much of the book, every character in the book embodies this. It comes from Cornel. He's describing, he says, look, the essential dignity, the basic dignity. This is what defines us as human beings and more maybe in a democracy as citizens is, as he puts it, the ability to contradict what is. The ability to contradict what is. Yes. Here is the way things are. Here is the power that you receive. Here's all that. And it's for you to say no. And just like, here we are talking about this today in Libya, the day that Tripoli has fallen, and those rebels contradicted what is, and Tahrir Square, they contradicted what is. The stories in this book are about people who contradict what is, and he's saying, look, this is a universal human condition in the American story. This is something that African Americans have had to particularly be aware of, and I think what's interesting about the fight with Obama, I mean, part of it, look, this is a piece that I wrote a couple of years ago. Most of what he's saying to Obama, it's in my story. And he said it a couple of years ago. He published a book between election and inauguration in which he started taking Obama to task. When he went out on the campaign trail and he started stumping for Obama, he said, look, this is what, and I think this is something that a lot of Obama supporters and folks who consider themselves liberals or on the left are struggling with right now. And they forgot about this policy. Yes. Look, I'm gonna work to get Obama elected, and then when he does, I'm gonna become his number one critic. Yeah, now, exactly. If Cornel does not always express that with absolute humility, let's not forget the man is a Princeton professor. He's a Princeton professor. And one thing you and I, Anthea, know is that Ivy League professors we're very humble, modest people. Ego goes with the territory, and he showed a little bit, and I don't think. To say that discredits and to ignore the critique that he's making. Here's the tension, though. It takes and this is even true for Cornel West. Okay, it takes a fine line to be able to walk between Rorty and Bootsy Collins. Okay, let's just face it. All right. I mean, if you're gonna do the funk, you got to figure out how to do the funk and be a pragmatist all at the same time. And I think that's the tension I really feel. I felt it in your essay, but I feel it with him all the time. I feel as though he wants to move freely within these worlds, but there's always a cost for moving between the worlds, right? And so that's the tension for him, is that he's not really, I mean, I think at some ways he's not really comfortable in either one. But it's easy for him to say, he's not. But Princeton. But let me say, I mean, that to me is that's what made the story exciting to me. Yeah. I mean, one of the things that we got into talking about, and I hadn't seen in other profiles, and I think he talks openly about this, is what he talks about he calls them the death shutters. Yes, I thought that was very interesting. And this fear, this feeling of death imminent, and that's related to him theologically, philosophically, sociologically, who he is in America, all these kinds of things, and talking about that is a position of discomfort. And the story of Cornel West, that also was so fascinating to me. To go back to that first book I mentioned, Prophesy Deliverance, he publishes that in 1982. It's his first book, and this guy had been from a very young age, just this boy genius, talented at everything he did, talented athletically, talented socially, talented, brilliantly talented academically, everything he did, and charismatic, at a young age, his church had said, you're going to be our next preacher. He goes in a different direction. He had a lot of people around him, and this is sort of the story that I thought hadn't been told in the early 80s. Now Reagan's been elected. Now America's finally really gone too far. We've gone so far right. And now we're going to start swinging back. We're going to have that revolution. Cornel West is going to lead the revolution. You get ready, Cornel. We're going to put you out front. So he gets out there in 1982, publishes a book, and he's ready. He's like, okay, I'm ready to go. And he looks around, and it turns out we'd entered an ice age. Yeah, and it's a sort of a man who had been prepared in every way to lead a revolution that never happened. He was prepared to lead the revolution, except the revolution happened in a different way. It happened because of rap music. That's the thing we have to thank Reagan for, right? And so that sort of relationship that he's had with music, I think, is the same. This way of which has been problematic for him.
It's been problematic. It's totally been problematic.
I mean, I think
it's been a good one. Yeah,
it's also been a good one, and I think he's been, much more nimble, and I mean nimble in the sort of the best sense of thinking, okay, I thought it was going to be like this, but instead it's like that,
Yeah.
and so that's the world I have to address myself in. But but realizing it's not quite the world I expected to be. What you said, not comfortable in any world. I mean, this is sort of why when I start the book. With an essay the title of which I cannot say on blogging heads. Sweet F-U-C-K all Colorado, which is originally entitled the book until we realized that bookstores wouldn't carry it. It's the name of a bar in Colorado. But I'd originally planned on starting with this essay about Cornel, this Begin with the Dead, because it set so many of the terms. I realized as I was sort of gathering these stories that I'd written, and I wrote these over, I've written for many years about American fundamentalism in books like The Family and C Street and so on.
Yeah.
And a lot of these were the stories that I wrote to keep myself sane, to go and say, well, here are people exercising political imagination in a different way. And Cornel, in some ways, I wanted to start with that. I decided not to, but I wanted to start with that because that position of being uncomfortable, of being between two worlds, of this didn't quite work out, of being prepared for something good, and then having to adjust yourself to that, but trying to hold on to the desire that you had, but also to recognize the very deep reality, despair, the death shudders, and so on. That, to me, is this very American condition, and it certainly defines the characters in the book, and I think a lot of us are in that position, whether or not we are,
whether we admit it or
Princeton
not.
professors with fabulous suits and gold cufflinks.
Yeah, no, it's true. But, here's the funny part. I mean, I think about the West essay, and then I'm sort of comparing it to Luce and the Battle Cry, And it seems as though maybe West and Luce aren't as far apart as we might think they might be.
No, not at all.
Right?
Not at all. Ron Luce, we're talking about Ron Luce. Ron Luce is the leader of this fundamentalist movement, this battle cry movement. An essay in the book called She Said Yes. The title comes from the alleged words of Cassie Bernal, the martyr of Columbine, a young high school student who, when the killers were going through, said, do you believe in God? And she said yes, and now at Christian rock concerts, there's an anthem and Kids Thunder. She said yes. Now, as it happens, she didn't. The whole exchange didn't happen. It's a martyr story.
Of course, but it's a martyr story.
It almost doesn't matter. This is what the people believe. And this very canny promoter, Ron Luce, this man who is building this movement, takes advantage of that, and it's as basically how to describe how right wing it is. They probably think Michelle Bachmann is kind of a liberal.
She's kind of a liberal to them.
She's kind of a liberal
over the top.
Yeah. They're very far right, but they're also super hipsters, which was an interesting thing for me. I went down originally again for Rolling Stone from them, and I go down to hang out with these fundamentalists in East Texas, and Van Zandt County, actually named after the family of the Great Lake Towns Van Zandt. I thought, well, I'm going to be, it's going to be a bunch of squares down here. And so these kids are so much hipper than me. But they're really fundamentalists. And this guy, Ron Luce, is in his 40s, but in a way, the same sort of thing. He wanted to lead a revolution. He was not as prepared as Cornel. But he has that critique of community. He knows he is contradicting what is. I mean, you go to his rallies, and I describe this in the book. I attended a rally in Cleveland, several thousand kids, and I
tell the story again, because this was just too much. I was like going, I can't believe this stuff.
It's sort of. There's a part where they take out a cow skin and they brand it, and so that's how. And there's a big camera, sort of, screens. Actually, let me grab a little sequence from the book there.
I want you to read it. I think they're going to help everybody kind of hear what this says.
Everyone's like saying, yes, I know, I went to Christian, I went to Sunday school.
No.
You did not go to Sunday school, my friend. Yeah. This is from She Said Yes. This is how you enlist in the army of God. First come the fireworks and the prayers and 4,000 kids who scream, we won't be silent anymore. Then the kids go to their knees, silent after all, but for the weeping and regrets of 15-year-olds. The light in the Cleveland arena fade to blue, and a man on the stage whispers about sin and love and the Father God. The kids rise, thrilled. En masse, they swear off harlots and adultery. The 21-year-old MC twitches a chain across the ass of her skin-tight red jeans, and I have to say, listen, there's so much sex in this production that is condemning sex, but it's using sex to condemn sex. Summons a lucky few from the crowd to show off their best dance moves for God. Give me what you got, she shouts. They dance, hip-hop for Jesus. A graceful balletic turn from an oversized boy who looks like a linebacker. Then they are ready. They are about to accept the mark of a warrior, explains Ron Luce. They're about to become branded by God. When you enlist in the military, there's a code of honor, Luce preaches, same as being a follower of Christ. The code requires what he calls a wartime mentality, survival orientation, and a readiness to face real enemies, the queers and the communists, feminists and Muslims, and also Luce's special nemesis, a cabal, he says, like Al-Qaeda, that's his words. This slips poisoned pop culture into innocent skulls, a conspiracy of advertising executives, clothing designers, film directors, musicians, even school teachers, techno-terrorists, he calls them, of mass media, doing to the morality of a generation what Osama bin Laden did to the Twin Towers. Quote, just as the events of September 11th, 2001 permanently changed our perspective on the world, Luce has written, so we ought to be awakened to the alarming influence of today's culture terrorists. They are wealthy, they are smart, and they are real. And, you know, Anthea, he's talking about us there.
I know he is.
We're not wealthy. Okay. I like to think
we're not wealthy.
We're reasonably bright. We are definitely real.
Too real.
But, you know, so it's this real, and it goes on like that. I mean, there's scenes, he's got 13-year-old kids writing down what they're going to sacrifice to the cause and encouraging. I sat with a couple of 13-year-old kids, and they said they were going to stop having sex.
I know, and I was like, they're 13, they're already having sex.
And I said, well, no, they're not. That was a crazy thing. I mean, they were sweet, nice little 13-year-old kids, but they've been literally in days of preaching, of telling that secular culture is this kind of pervert that is trying to attack you and everything. But there's an element in this, and just to bring it back, he said, how is this guy like Cornel West? There's an element in which he recognizes the ways in which culture can wound people. I mean, there's a big part of the rally where he says, you know, you don't want to let yourself be branded by Coca-Cola. You don't want to be a servant of the Gap. Yeah. You don't want Hollister, you know, that popular teens clothing line to define you. I mean, it sounds like this kind of leftist critique of consumerism. The diagnosis is almost like a diagnosis Cornel might come around to. It's the prescription.
Yeah.
But it's folks realizing there's something fundamentally wrong with the way the world is. We have to imagine something different. Cornel imagines one thing. Battlecry imagines something
but see,
much
the
more
thing
terrifying.
is about Luce is that what his imagination is sort of predicated on, you know, everything is evil, where I think, you know, Cornel wants, you know, in some moments Cornel thinks about utopia, but he also knows utopia is bad, right? You know? So, I mean, Luce
he knows we'll never get there. I mean,
we're never going to get there.
That's the Christian
Luce
part
wants
of
you
it.
to get there, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, you know, that we are in the long Saturday between, you know, the Friday of crucifixion and Sunday, you know?
Yeah.
We're in that long Saturday. And I think that's his Christian perspective, which even as a non-Christian, I find, you know, that's the great lesson of Christianity. And you know, I'm always I write a lot about religion because I've written critically about fundamentalism. Sometimes people think I'm anti-religion. And you know, I'm always sort of drawn to theologians because they're working with the most powerful metaphors there are.
And they're trying to work through something that's, you know, it's akin to the human condition, even if you don't believe anything, right?
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
You know,
yeah.
But it's sort of like, you know, when you talked about going to the Hell House thing where they did all the scenes and everything, and they did the last scene where, what did he say? He said something about they had the scene where somebody was whipped, and he said, that's real. You know,
Jesus was whipped, well, the Hell House, for people who aren't familiar with it, Hell House is a Christian conservative sort of entertainment innovation. It's like a haunted house that you might have at Halloween, except the frights are secular things. So one room has, you know, actors pretending to be gay men. Another room has an abortion being acted out. Another room has a kid online being stalked by a predator. Sorry?
Domestic violence house, right? That was one of them. It was something somebody was getting beat. There was a domestic violence house. I thought that was really interesting. There was somebody getting a husband beating a wife or something.
Oh yeah. Domestic violence, and that's a problem. You know, that's a problem of sort of secular culture, and even those things that you might say, well, how is that secular culture? There'll be a person dressed up as a demon and says that's what happens when you take prayer out of the schools. Blah ha ha. And so in this Hell House, when I went with these students from Ron Luce's Honor Academy, and it was a sort of interesting thing because I'm driving with these 3 young kids. They're off campus, and they start telling stories, and they're 3 young teens, and they're kind of maybe a little flirty with each other, and they're talking about sex, and they'd all they're not even young teens, they're early 20s, they're adults, and they're talking about sex. They've had sex, they miss it, and so on. They are confused about what is wrong. In other words, they're talking about desire is what it is. And they have been taught the desire. And then we get to the Hell House and we go through all these horrible things. And in the midst of it, one of them confesses to me that she, in fact, had an abortion and that she thinks the right thing to do. Well, finally, we get to the end and you sort of you actually go into a coffin. And again, it's sort of like the weird kind of campy naivete of some of these fundamentalism. You take a bunch of young folks and you squeeze them together in a coffin. So I as the elder person there, I said, I'll take my own coffin, thank you. The 2 women and the man squeezed into one coffin together. And then you're released into this dark room and you sort of grab a hold on each other. And then there's an angel and it guides you to a scene of the crucifixion, or actually an actor playing Christ and a centurion, and they're whipping him, and there's blood splattering all over. And what I was told at the end by one of the people who had set this thing up was that blood that you saw, it's real. We don't know how else to do it. That's blind faith. That's blind faith. That's that kind of that's a failure of imagination. You do not need to whip your actors. This is
it's just a fail, right? I mean, I kept thinking to myself, it's like, this is like a huge fail. I mean, first of all, it made me think about, the Catholic, sort of in the Catholic tradition, you get scourged, you could flagellate yourself, right, to purge yourself of sin. And I just thought, okay, this is another way, evangelicals have taken this over to the other side. They're like, we want to be Catholic so badly, we're going to even do blood in our horror house, right? In our Hell House. But then I thought about it and I thought, this is where the sincerity about religion can get you. Mm-hmm. And all the things that he talked about, whether this is Al Qaeda or everything else, I'm like, these people are not. This is that moment where the lines get blurred, and it's really hard to see how, especially this. And I work with this with students a lot, is to try to get them to see, those people aren't somebody who's not like you. You could be just like them if you're in this kind of environment. And, to beat somebody for a Hell House, and to flip, let real live blood fly around, I thought that was really something.
Yeah, and in some ways it's the difference between, the idea espoused by Cornel and some of the other people in the book of being ready to die.
Yeah. And
then the difference is wanting to die almost.
Mm-hmm.
And that's sort of what, not that these kids in the Hell House wanted to die, but they wanted to erase themselves. Yeah. They almost wanted to not exist. It's a self-denial. That's why I sort of use the word desire. I think it's very important. I think what's interesting to me in American political culture and American religion culture alike, if you sort of use the kind of the rough device of a spectrum of left to right, across that spectrum, everyone talks about selflessness, but we don't talk about desire. And the desire's intimate relationship with democracy. So, you can be ready to die, but you hope that you get to that better place. You hope you get to that better community. And I don't mean salvation. I mean, it's for Cornel West, who's one of the things I write about is the Matrix movies are the science fiction movies are in large part based upon his writing. So that big sort of final scene in the last movie with the giant rave and the party.
Yeah.
That's his utopian vision. But it's not just that, being ready to die. One of the other essays I write about, an essay about a journalist named Brad Wilm.
Yes, that's a great
journalist.
Story.
And this guy who's ready to die. He did not want to die. And that's important to understand when you read the story and find out what became of him, because he has become, sadly, a martyr. And remember, the word martyr means witness. He bore witness. Brad Wilm was an anarchist journalist from a wealthy family in Chicago, and sort of got involved in the left and was kind of just like a guy playing around. But put in years and was there in many fights and grew serious and became serious about what he was doing. It did plenty of dumb things along the way. I have too. I think most people have. But I had finally, he was in his late 30s. He was getting serious about journalism. He'd become a video journalism. He'd already covered serious police killings in Brazil. He'd been in the midst of a police riot. He went down to Oaxaca, Mexico, where maybe the most serious revolt in North America in the last, in the last century, practically, not quite a century. The last 50, 60 years took place. It began with a school teachers strike, but it turned into the whole state rising up against that incredibly repressive, corrupt, right-wing Mexican regime. And it was a war. So Brad Will went down there with his video camera and was filming it, and he was filming a fight between strikers and the police. And he's trying to hang back. He's learned his lesson. He's trying to be a responsible journalist. Don't get in the front lines. Don't get yourself killed. Your job is to document it. But a bullet found him, and he filmed it. And in fact, if you slow the footage down slow enough, you can see it on YouTube. You can see the puff of smoke of the bullet coming toward him, and then bang, and Brad falls down, and he screams, and that's it, and he died, and he became a martyr in some ways to this movement, and the struggle goes on. But that's kind of the example, Brad Will, and I think some people looked at this and said, oh, this guy had, glorious dreams of himself. And as I traveled around and talked to all his friends and his family, that guy did not want to die. That guy he didn't want to die.
Life.
He loved life. He was ready to die. He said, I'm going to go and cover this thing that's dangerous.
Yeah, and I think
that's the difference. And the fundamentalists, I think, they see something glorious in wanting to die.
Yeah, they think there's something waiting for them when they die. You see, so like Brad is like, Brad's thinking, I'm not going to die, but I'm going to this thing that is going to bring me to the brink. I thought two things were interesting. One was the story about the woman, in the midst of the story about Brad, the woman who falls in love with him but never consummates the relationship, right? Mm-hmm. And so there's an element of desire there too. There's a desire to be with this person, but I'm just going to enshrine him. Right? Because I know what he's doing is great and all of that, and how she can be the person who keeps his story going, And
there's people all over the world. I mean, depending on where you're watching this, you may not think it's there, but you can, and I know in Philadelphia where you are, look around, you will find some graffiti that says Brad Will Presente. In death, he has become a martyr, and they've made him a folk hero and a folk legend. Not something he wanted to be, but there's some, I mean, and in his life, there was many people, many women. He was a beautiful man. There's many women who, wanted to get closer to him because they wanted to get closer to that imagination. And that has, to me, suggest something about the sort of, when I speak of the country in between faith and faithlessness, that tightrope between despair and desire. It's for so many of us, it's our inability to really confront our desires and to acknowledge them and to deal with also that our desires are about more than wanting, someone who looks pretty. And I think that's where, the fundamentalist critique has some honesty. The fundamentalist critique says, look, we're going to commodify human beings. We're going to say, instead of having a political imagination, why don't you just drool over this internet porn?
Yeah, exactly. Because it's all about sex, right? But it isn't.
It isn't. It is all about sex, and that's not a bad thing.
For them it is.
If you make the connection, and I don't think it's a coincidence that so many of the, I guess, heroes. I mean, I'm always reluctant to use the word heroes. I like to think of everyday people, but the heroes in this book are people who tell their stories. You also had to engage with their rather complicated.
Relational lives, yes.
Romantic lives. Cornel, Brad, Howard Rosenthal, the last Yiddish writer, all these people.
I know you didn't mean it this way, but I kept thinking to myself, I was like, I know this is not a book about men, but this seems to be a book about men who have real issues with women. And just because I do the gender stuff too, I had to bring this up with you because I just think, here's Brad who has all these women. He can't, it's his free-willing spirit. He can't keep this relationship. You got Professor West who's got, like these 3 marriages and they just don't hold up, and then you've got, the Luce who's like, I'm happily married, but my teenage daughters buy my clothes. That's a little weird.
Yeah, yeah, and I spend most of my time with teenage girls talking about sex and how you totally shouldn't have it, and it'll be so seductive and it'll feel like this, but you totally shouldn't do it. I mean, this kind of loose. Who knows what he's talking about when he talks about middle-aged perverts?
Because I'm like going, you don't sound like you're too. This thing is like really weird, right? So I kind of wonder if this whole thing about desire and hope and everything else can we always reduce it down to that? Because I know for conservative religious folks, it's the root of all evil usually is sex. It's not money anymore because everybody loves money. But I kept thinking about this all throughout, and does that tie us into the desire to live a certain way? You know what they say. It's like sort of like if you keep the sex drive going, you keep a will to live, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I wondered if that wasn't kind of an undercurrent of the book in certain kinds of ways. Is that sex is this thing that holds it all together in a certain kind of way?
I think so, although it's interesting. I do want to say, one of the things that I kind of like about this book is you see there's lots of writers like me who, find it fun to go off and have adventures and talk to interesting people and park our stories in magazines for a little while and gather them together in books. And they often, there's that kind of gonzo stuff, which I'm not actually a big fan of, and it's all kind of macho.
Yeah.
So I kind of like that there are as many women who are heroes in this book as men. So we've been talking about Cornel and Brad and Ron, who was not a hero. In fact, the hero of the Ron Luce story is a young woman named Valerie Rooks.
Yes.
The woman who says, look, I had an abortion and I don't care. And you know what? I love sex. That was great. I'm not going to pretend it wasn't. Or Hava Rosenfarb, who is the last great Yiddish writer, fortunately died just as the book was going to press, and author of a
and I thought that was a great story. You should tell a little bit about the story.
Well, Hava Rosenfarb was this young woman in the Łódź ghetto. Łódź, for Americans, it's Lodz. It's that Polish city, and brilliant young poet. And along comes the Holocaust, and she had that kind of profoundly empathetic imagination that allowed her. She was curious about what it felt like to be other people, and including, even Nazis. She would look at these Nazis and trying to imagine who they were. She stored it all. She ended up going to Auschwitz and Dachau, and she survived. And nothing noble about the survival. She survived. That's it. I don't want this. One of the lessons of Hava is that we are all collaborators. That's one of the things she said. And she survived and made it to Canada. And she had been a poet, but she decided to write this towering book called The Tree of Life, Der Baum von Leben in Yiddish, and 3 volumes. And it's a world. It's everything. She tried to represent everything in the Łódź ghetto. And it's unlike any other work of Holocaust literature you can find. But of course, she wrote it in Yiddish, and so she's a towering giant in Yiddish, and you've never heard her. And when I went and spent a couple of weeks with her up in Montreal, Canada, where she lived, and would just sit in her living room with her, talking with her, and this very brilliant, this sort of very sharp person who had seen too much and was too good a writer to be dishonest about anything. And one of her most powerful stories, in fact, is called Edge's Revenge, about 2 women, one who had been a capo in the camps, a collaborator, and one who had been saved by the other, and how they sort of switch places in Montreal life, and it also takes place in this kind of strange sort of sexual tension between these women and men and so on. A little bit reminiscent of Isaac Bashevis Singer's Enemies, a love story, but I would argue better and more powerful and more fearless. And again, you see that you do. I'm not reducing things to sex. I don't think talking about sex as a part of life is reducing it, but you see it there. The long essay that I talked about, Sweet. I guess I can say this. They just won't use it. It's blocking. Sweet Falkall, Colorado. Sweet Falkall, Colorado. I go off to Colorado to visit my old college girlfriend. I don't carry a torch, where our families are very good friends with one another. But we were in college. We were great lefties, and we, in fact, someday one of our early dates was marching into the town of Amherst
Yes,
when a man had burned himself to death. Yeah, a man had burned himself to death in the Common in protest against the Iraq War.
That was not good.
You know, that's a great place to meet girls. Yeah. So if you're out there, you know, wait for self-immolation, and your opportunity is there. And so we go there, and she was this real lefty, but over the years, she's moved rightward, but with no loss of power and her brilliance as a writer. She's a much better writer than I am. And she became a DA and a rising star in the Republican Party. And out in rural Colorado, where she's from, she campaigned on horseback. She actually had a shootout for a fundraiser. And
shootout. That's
became
so great.
vengeance-minded. Yeah. You know, this is this weird thing that they have out in Colorado now and some other places. It's, you know, it's like a family activity. You can go to like a ghost town, and bad guys and good guys pop up, and you have to, you know, it's like a video game. You have to shoot the right ones and not, except you're actually shooting people or shooting pop-ups, but with real guns and so on. And it's just felt to be this family values thing, moral, making split-second decisions on whether or not to kill. It's a sort of moral decision. But I mean, but Molly is one of the most this woman that I read about is one of the most complex and subtle moral thinkers that I know. So I wanted to go out. You know, I couldn't dismiss her, even though our politics were worlds apart. I couldn't dismiss her, and so I sort of went on this journey through Sweet Farquhar, Colorado, which is the name of a bar where I stopped along the way to try and understand what I find this very sort of deep thinker. Now that story, I'm trying to remember. I don't think there is any. This sounds wrong. There's no sex in that story. There's an old girlfriend.
No.
Our own families now. But that's not what it's about. But it is about that kind of. Look, it's a big story about vengeance, and vengeance is another form of desire, and it's another way in which, when we talk in American life about, you know, public servants and being selfless and so on, we deny desire. We also deny vengeance. We deny the reality of vengeance. That's a human emotion. We got to deal with that, and we don't deal with it by pushing it down and pretending it's not there.
Yes, exactly.
We deal with it in some ways like Molly does. She's a prosecutor, and you know, she's a far right Republican, and I would send money to her campaign, and
and that's saying something.
She's doing the God's work.
Yeah, well, I think, you know, in the last couple of minutes that we have, I'm sort of thinking about how this sort of rounds everything out. Could you sort of think about how to extrapolate what this book might say about where we are right now? I mean, I think about what you said about vengeance, and we're doing this Blogging Heads a little bit about 3 weeks before the 10th anniversary of 9/11. And we're going to have a lot of politicians and everybody pontificating about this, but there's, 3,000 plus families that will have to deal with the fact that 10 years ago, they lost loved ones in a really, sort of fantabulous, horrific way, right? And I'm back to square one with Cornel West about death and this thing about hope. And I just wonder, what do you think this book has for people who are trying to figure things out as we come up to this big anniversary and all the hoopla that's going to come in the middle of it?
Well, I mean, I think what it has is what this collection of, to me, fairly amazing people that I encountered gave me. Molly, Cornel and Brad Will and his family, which I spent time with, and the legacy of Doc Boggs needing these fundamentals run loose and so on, and this recognition of the reality of despair. And you talked about 9/11, and I think we all felt that around 10 years ago, around 9/11. And it's interesting, there's a moment of sort of political depletion right now, especially I think for those who are not as conservative, and they look at Obama and they see this guy doesn't seem to be fighting very hard, and over there is the Rick Perry coming on hard and Michelle Bachmann, and the energy seems to be there, and it's like, why can't we build anything here? Why we fall back on these old fights? And I think, to me, the real parallel in the book is between Cornel and the late Doc Boggs, that old banjo player from the 1920s who was this mean, nasty man. He understood despair, but he understood, like Cornel, I think, that this idea of hope. We want to talk about hope, right? Audacity of hope. Well, let's talk about where hope comes from, because hope, hope is not. It's not you and me, Anthea, talking. I hope Blogging Heads uses this video. We know they're going to.
Yeah.
I hope my candidate wins. You know, your candidate maybe has a chance. It may not be a good chance or not. Hope is where you get to when there's no good reason to believe that this thing will come to pass. Hope is rooted in despair. It's, it's not an odds. It's not a gamble. It's deeper than that. And I think, to me, the lesson that these people teach me, and even the fundamentalists like Ron Luce, and so on, is that political imagination comes from a deep, deep well. And I think you talk about where we are at now, and especially in the sort of historical picture, and there's a couple sort of historical essays in the book and so on. We've lost sight of that deep well. We've lost, we don't hear the death shudders anymore. We feel like we've got to hold those things at bay. And you hold those things at bay, you're also holding at bay the possibility of hope. You're holding, you've got to put things on the line. Exactly. You've got to be ready to die, and you've got to hope like hell that you don't. I think that's where we're at now. And I think, that's all sort of in the abstract. You say the anniversary of 9/11, and we say 2012, and I have to say every interview I do about this on this book about everyday people ask me, well, what does this mean for the GOP primary? And I actually think it does. It's sort of an annoying question, but I think it does mean something for the way in which we engage with those politics. For the way in which we seek that sort of deep well of political imagination. And we hold our politicians, our leaders, we hold ourselves accountable to that deep well of imagination. That's what I learned from these people that I write about in this book, is what I'm still trying to do and probably don't. That's the last lesson, I'll shut up. You need to understand, you probably won't succeed. I don't succeed. None of the people I write about in this book succeed. If they did, then we'd all be living in that wonderful utopia that they imagine. We'd all be living in sweet fuck all Colorado. But,
exactly, at the bar.
But we are not there yet. We are not there. We are not there yet. But we just gotta, keep digging deeper, keep reaching higher, and imagine that place without resort to these safe spaces that we inhabit in American life. That's what I think the book is about for the present moment.
Yeah, well, it's a great book, Jeff, and I just want to say, 2 thumbs up, first of all. Second of all, it's going to find its way in one of my classes, or 2 or 3, somehow, some way. And I'm sure they're all going to want to read Sweet Fuck All Colorado before they read anything else, but,
Well, there's 2, on a closing note, I did not intend this. I do not advocate vulgarity. There are 2 essays with the word fuck. There's also Rock Like Fuck, which takes place, I think, I know where you are in Philadelphia.
You know where
it takes place about 100 yards from where you are.
That's right, and I get to see it all the time.
Real church basement where a little sort of pop music, David is taking on the Goliath of the music industry, and producing little rock shows and doing the real thing.
Clear Channel.
Exactly. You take it on Clear Channel, take it on the big music industry. But, that's the thing. This struggle, it does not have to be earnest and dull and dry and serious. The struggle should rock like fuck. That's right. That's my last word.
And that's what you and I are going to do for the rest of 2011, right?
and many more years to come. Let's hope. Yeah.
That's what I'm hopeful. Well, thanks so much, Jeff Sharlet. This is a great book, and Sweet Heaven When I Die. Faithlessness in the Country in Between. Go get your copy now. And I'm even going to show mine so we can see that I have it here. Look, right in front of my computer, Sweet Heaven When I Die.
Great cover photo by the wonderful photographer Stephen Shore. Here, you got to look at it real closely. This is the cool thing.
It is a great thing.
It's a little meta. It's a mountainscape with a billboard of a mountainscape, and it sort of goes in. And that's it. That's where we're trying to get to. There it is. Right. Sweet Fuck All Colorado.
That's right.
Look at it, remember it,
get
and
your
when
copy.
You see it, you'll know it. Yeah.
All right. Thanks, Jeff.
Thanks, Anthea.
Bye.